Hello there, I'm Leo Waldrop for Kit Guru, and I'm sheltering behind this enormous great big Thermaltake Core V51 case. You may have noticed this case in a previous review we did, which was the Corsair H110i GT liquid cooler. It's a 280mm radiator. I needed a big case, and this Thermaltake just accommodated that cooler without even thinking about it. I'm just going to pull off the windowed side panel just so we can make sure we're not going to get any reflections going on, because they do act like mirrors. So it's two captive thumb screws. Swing the panel out, lift it away, and turn around and do the same with the other panel. Now, as you'll see here, the case is empty. After I did the Corsair review, I stripped the chassis down, so it's now empty. So we're going to do a little bit of funky editing in this review, and we'll be putting in shots of the built system, which was a Seasonic 1200 watt power supply, an MSI 970 gaming motherboard, some G-Skill Ripjaws memory, AMD FX 8370 processor, and of course the Corsair liquid cooler. And I chose the AMD setup precisely, if you recall the Corsair review, because I wanted to generate loads of heat. I also used a Sapphire Radeon R9 290 Trix graphics card because it's a big beefy fella and it looked the part. So that was very much an AMD system, whereas generally for testing we're using Intel hardware. So with the side panels off, you can see just how large the innards of the case are. Thermaltake says, bless them, that this case can accommodate a mini ITX motherboard. Well, of course it can, and also micro ATX, ATX, and more to the point, eATX. That's extended ATX. We're talking 12-inch by 13-inch motherboards, which is more or less server territory. But of course, the main market for eATX in this day and age are anybody using Intel Extreme Edition, the LGA 2011 motherboards. X99 chipset will drop in this without any problem at all. And I mean, just look at that enormous great big cutout in the motherboard tray, huge access. Everything about this case is just big. If I turn to the front, actually let's just have a quick look at the front before I pull it apart. So we've got two optical drive bays, they're blanked. Obviously push those out if you're installing optical drives. Great big illuminated power button, reset button, headset jacks, pair of USB 3. I like the look of the front panel. It's mesh and it looks the part. If I just give this a pull, and it requires a bit of violence. There we go, and that comes away. And turn it back round so you can see. So the front panel comes away cleanly, and you'll see we've got all the IOs are left intact on the case. So we haven't got any dangling cables, which is nice. The front panel, it has a sort of one of those lift out mesh screens, and also the two blanks for the optical drives are also, they've got bits of foam in them, so it's filtered. In the top of the case, try and lift it out, it's a magnetic dust sheet. And now we've got the front exposed. You can see there's a pull out filter screen, and the same at the rear. So actually let's take those away completely. So we're talking fully filtered at the bottom, filtered at the front, filtered at the top. You get a pair of 120 fans as standard at the front and a 120 at the rear. So as the system is shipped, you can just use it as it comes, whop in any motherboard you want quite clearly. Even you can see the amount of clearance you've got for graphics cards, no problem whatsoever. Unless you've got some absolutely colossal dual GPU card, which takes up a massive amount of space, in which case we're into moving drive bays. Other than that, the system is absolutely ready to go, and as you can see, it comes apart in a trice, I think would be the word. Now, the drive bays, slightly curious, and actually in a way the drive bays are sort of the story of this case, because there are these drive caddies that lever out like so, and you either put a 2.5 or a 3.5 inch drive in them, and then slide back in. And you notice that two of the caddies are missing. There are 5 in total, 3 there, 2 there. And the reason that 2 are missing is because I've put them in the alternative locations, or alternate locations, which to hang on the back of the motherboard tray. And the reason for that is that when you remove the drive towers to give yourself plenty of room for installing liquid cooling, or well, it would be liquid coolers. I mean, you could install a bunch of fans, but I don't really go with that. But basically, huge cooling, you lose all your drive bays, because there are, despite appearances, no 2.5-inch SSD bays on the back of the motherboard tray, which is curious. Now, here, these two sort of caddies hang in this recess, and they fit. So you could, if you choose, put 3.5-inch drives on them. However, behind the motherboard tray, it's actually quite tight for space. Surprisingly so. There's maximum 25mm of clearance, and in fact, when you get to this point here, you're hard pressed to even put a power connector for an SSD in place. It's tight, surprisingly so. And such a large case, you think they could add in 10, maybe 20mm and not even notice they've done it. It's so big, but tight for space despite appearances. Obviously, if you put a pair of drives in there, you're reducing your options for cable management quite hugely. You're basically keeping the cables down the bottom, and there is no power supply cover, so that's a little bit of a shame, because it means the cables are basically going to be bunched there. Obviously, a modular power supply is the only way to go. On the subject of power supply, slightly curious thing, that little bar there, and it's in the photos on Kit Guru, so power supply, basically just drop it in. Obviously, it mounts 4 screws at the rear in the standard styly. The power supply sort of rests on that bar there just to support it, but because you have to kind of hook the power supply under this bit of a sort of flange at the rear of the case, you do actually have to give it quite a significant push down squeeze, and oof. So despite appearances which would seem to suggest any power supply you want to put in, you just basically stand back and hurl the thing in the general direction of the case and it will just fly into place, it actually doesn't quite work like that. It's really curious to report. You would think it would be a doddle. Actually, it's a little bit of a fight to get a power supply in. So there we go. Let me just take off these two caddies. Now, the business with the drive bays, slightly strange thing here as well. You've got, as you can see, 2 screws there and 2 screws below, hidden behind that bunch of cables on the front panel. Thumb screws allegedly, however they are very tight. And then on the back of the case we've got some more screws. They're sort of down the side here. These hooky things being what the caddies sit on if you use in these positions. Slightly strange to see. So to remove each of the towers, you have to remove a couple of thumb screws. Let me just pop those out. Now, the screws, when they came from when the case was supplied, were bloomin' tight. That's the technical expression I'm going with, bloomin' tight. Such that once you've actually got the case, once you've got the motherboard installed in the case rather, it's hard to get the screws out because access is tight. And I actually ended up using a pair of chunky pliers to get a really good grip and twist. I didn't feel proud of myself for doing that, but I didn't really have a lot of choice. So if you're using this system, in this case, you definitely want to get those screws slackened off in the first place. Right, so that caddy comes out nice, little drive tower with the 2 caddies comes out easily. That's fine. Then we move down to the lower one and we slacken off the screw on the back. And we come around here and we go inside. And that's 1 screw and 2 screw, and there's 1 screw remaining. And as I undo that last screw, and here it comes, and the caddy just drops. And the reason for that is that the caddy actually is positioned in sort of mid-air. It's held up about 1 centimetre above the floor of the case. It doesn't have a location. I don't quite understand it. We've seen with, I think it was Vantex, I could be wrong there, where the bottom tower had a sort of little nylon spacer and the thing just sat on it. You could remove it if you wanted, but basically you just plonk the thing in place and secured it. In this instance, you have to kind of hold it in just the right place and put the screws in. There's no sort of date and there's no reference point. So you have to hold it in place, find the correct location, put the screws in. And once it's all secure, it's no problem at all. The thing is, potentially you've got 3 drives in there, potentially 3 mechanical drives, which in this day and age would be a little peculiar, obviously, with SSD being so popular. But the idea of a drive tower that can just drop when you undo the screws, I have to confess, I hate that. It's a small point, but I just hate the idea, the risk of dropping hard drives. It's not good. Now the thing is, you've got the 2 and the 3 split, and that's quite nice because it means you can choose either 2 or 3 or 5. Also, you've got a range a selection of mounting points, so you can choose where you put which of the towers, which is dead handy because if you've got a single graphics card, you know it's going to be here. Therefore, you can clear that space if you want to give yourself a clear run of cooling air. If you're going SLI or Crossfire, you might want to change how you do things. I must confess, the idea of taking out all the drive towers and then using these on the back, I don't much like it. I would be inclined, particularly if I was using SSD, not so much with hard drives. With SSD, I think I'd be cobbling together a mounting position because those mounts I don't like. The optical drive bays, the 2 of them here, take out these screws here and the tinware just comes out. And then, as you can see, the front is completely open. Now, the top of the case, let's just take the filter off. The top of the case is basically a metal mesh, and finding the correct holes to mount a liquid cooler is absolutely straightforward. And the thing is that the options for liquid cooling in this case are absolutely colossal. What they're saying is you can go for a 360mm in the top or a 420. 420 at the front, 360 top, or switch them round. Clearly, to have those 2 enormous coolers in, you've got to clear out all the drive caddies, towers, the whole caboose, no two ways about it. You've basically got to gut the thing and then you can go for it. Now, realistically, there aren't many people using that sort of cooling, a handful. However, if you choose, for example, use a pair of 280s or 240s, that's easy peasy. And it also means you can, you've got a few more options with the drive caddies and drive mounts. So you can go with the most enormous coolers on the market, and not just one but 2 of them, and there are other mounting points down the bottom as well should you choose, although I hate the idea of putting cooling down near my power supply if I can possibly avoid it. But the idea of cooler at top, cooler at front, it's a properly practical suggestion. The other alternative thing that caught my eye was fan support. You can, if you choose at the top, put 2 200mm fans. Bit wacky, depending on where your desk is and where the thing is, you might actually not want that sort of waft of air coming towards you. But the options that Thermaltake is giving you here are huge. However, and this is the thing, to my mind, this case has been built as a damn great big open box to accommodate whatever cooling you want. That's fair enough. And then they thought, ooh, now we better put some drive bays in. And that's what we've got. So the optical drive bays, it's a bit of tin and these 4 screws. Fair enough. I mean, optical drives are very much an option, an optional optical drive. You may not want an optical drive in this day and age, and that's entirely valid, in which case, goodbye. Hard drives, this is the thing, you need an SSD at the very least. We all do. Preferably you want 2 mounts. And I struggle to see why they couldn't find a couple of mounting points on the motherboard tray. That seems to me to be a really straightforward thing to do. Also, the space behind the motherboard tray, it's lacking, and that's just a bit silly. And again, the tie down points for cabling, you've got very few. There are 1, 2, 3, I think there's a couple more under there, there's 1 there. I want more space, I want 20 tie down points. The power supply cover I would have liked to see, however, that's not a big deal. That's just something I'd like. But clearly, if you're going with cooling, that is something that's less of an issue. So I'm not going to really bang on about a power supply cover. But there is no denying, as you'll see from the photos and as you'll see from the clips of the built system, with a decent modular power supply down the bottom, the cabling is a little bit left to its own devices. It's not a beautiful thing. And they haven't really helped us on that score. So it's a big case. The options for putting in radiators galore, massive, or indeed, if you're that way inclined, some very large, very slow fans, that would work as well. Cooling in this case is just epic. Support for motherboards is terrific. I like the styling of it. The build quality isn't brilliant. It's not flexy. It's just kind of looks a little crude. but I'm not getting any sharp edges, didn't cut myself, no nastiness, everything fitted. But these, for example, one of these two little sort of hooks that the caddy sits on was bent when the case arrived. It was easy to bend back. And in a way, that's a sign of the thing, because it did bend and it was easy to bend back because it's a little bit flimsy. But everything is properly supported, and in terms of construction, I have no issues. So that might sound like a complaint, and in a sense it is. However, this case is just under £80, which for a case of this size, of these sorts of options, is actually very cheap indeed. And this is an unusual thing for me to say. I almost wish they'd gone up market a little bit. I wish they'd moved up closer to £100. Don't go past £100, move towards £100, bit more beauty, bit more loveliness, bit more on the engineering front, and I don't think we'd have really quibbled too much, because under £100 for an E80X case that's fine. Once you get over £100, you start demanding, features and special stuff. So $79.99 for this Core V51 case is actually rather cheap. But I can see why it's cheap, because the actual basic metalwork is fairly rudimentary. But I like the approach, the way you can slap in a huge amount of cooling, colossal cooler front, colossal cooler top, or fans galore. But I don't like the way the drive bays are more or less an afterthought. An SSD mount would have made a lot of difference to my feelings towards this case. But it's certainly interesting, and if you're on a budget, by goodness, it should be on your shopping list. So that's Leo Waldock for Kit Guru, and this is the Thermaltake Core V51 E80X case.